Welcome to the Tanya Acker Show. What does it really mean to be a first? That's what I talk about with my next guest. She's Kamin Samuel. She is the Navy's first Black woman helicopter pilot. We talk about what it took to get there. We also talk about what happens in the course of making that type of history. Sometimes the people who you thought would be supportive can be less so. And sometimes one might be pleasantly surprised by finding or making allies and friends in new places. Here I am with Kamin Samuel. I hope you enjoy. Welcome to the podcast, Dr. Kamin Samuel. Thank you for being here.
Oh, I'm so happy to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me.
So one thing that most people know is that you can't really get anything done in life if at some point you don't endure or overcome some type of conflict. Conflict is inevitable. How would you describe the role that conflict has played in getting you where you are?
Well, I love that you bring it in right from the beginning, like conflict to me or obstacles, right? Because people shy away from conflict, right? They're conflict avoidant. And the truth is we can't grow without conflict. And I tell my clients all the time, they'll be complaining about their family and what has happened in their family. And I'm like, well, you have like a little misunderstanding about what that conflict is there to help you with. I like to think of it as an egg, a chicken and egg. Inside of that egg, it can be a butterfly or whatever. Inside of that, it's safe. It's warm. If you don't break free, if somebody cracks that egg for you, that chick cannot fly, cannot fully progress. A butterfly, the same thing if somebody cuts it out of the cocoon. Conflict is required for us to grow and to find out who we are and how do we see the world and grow our own belief in who we are, what we can do, and own our gifts and abilities.
You are the Navy's first African-American woman helicopter pilot. You've made history. Now, Kamin, when you think about making that history and accomplishing what you did, is there a conflict? Is there sort of a battle with anyone or with anything that you had to overcome to get there that you want to talk about?
Well, there was a lot of conflict. First, internal conflict, right? Could I even do it? At first I was like, no, I'll go the easier route than going aviation because I knew it was going to be challenging mentally, emotionally, physically, even spiritually. And then externally, the conflict was I wasn't an athlete. And I was an average student, but not, top of my class kind of student. So I had these beliefs about myself and whether I could really accomplish what I wanted to accomplish. And so I had to endure a lot of conflict around, especially physical things. I failed this one run many times and had extra help to get through it. And I find this with most people, it's both the internal, right? For me, it was, am I good enough? Could I even become a pilot? What made me think when I was down there in Pensacola all by myself, what made me think that this was a good idea? And then the external of, okay, now that I'm here, how do I actually fulfill this mission that I've decided to go on? And how am I going to get through an obstacle course, which really is part of life, that we have obstacle courses that we have to get through and have to strengthen from.
I think what you're saying is that the war with the voices inside your head sometimes, the voices that are telling you you're not good enough, you're not fast enough, you're not smart enough, that can be as big a battle as battling exterior forces. When you think about your career, not just the history that you made in the Navy, but just your career more generally, were there times when, you thought somebody was not on your side, but then they turned out to be an unexpected ally? And if so, I'd love to hear about it. I think that sometimes, people go into situations, especially tough ones. Now we use this language where like, this person's an ally and that person's not an ally. Like what does allyship more generally mean to you? And tell me about a time when you encountered somebody who turned out to be one in a way that surprised you.
Ally is an interesting word because it sets up a paradigm that I usually don't use that much, which is there's an ally and an enemy. So if you have allies, there must be an enemy. And so for me, I've been really blessed to have some amazing allies. So, we wouldn't think necessarily, as an African-American female, that white males would be my strongest allies throughout my career, whether it was the military, corporate, and even as a coach. And they have championed me. They have believed in me, seen me in a way that maybe others haven't. And so for me, it's always looking at, as allies, it's like, one, what are we up to? So I'm somewhat still mission driven in my life. So what am I doing, and who can I have with me? Some of the surprises that weren't allies were women, women leaders or even peers, because there was some perceived competition versus we're all in this together. And so the ability for me to create strong allies with my, counterparts, my compadre males in my fields has been so powerful for me to grow in any area, because without them, I wouldn't know because there's things that they'll say behind the scenes like, hey, do this or whatever. So I'm very coachable. So the ability, I wanted to hear everything they wanted to share and then put it into action.
It's a good point that you raise and a good reminder, because often, if you are a woman, if you're a woman of color, if you're a Black woman, there are a lot of rooms where there aren't that many other people who look like you. And so it's important to find allyship, to find folks who will support you, who may not be in your package. Sometimes you may not have any choice if you want to get any support at all. So why this path? You're the first Black woman to be a Navy helicopter pilot. Why did you choose aviation? Why the Navy? Why did you go down this road?
The best I can describe where it first started was my older brother was NROTC in college and Navy, and he would bring home his gear on break and his cover, his hat, and I'd go in his bedroom and, when he wasn't around, and I'd put on his cover and I'd practice with his sword. And I'm younger than he is, so 7 years, and so I was very impressionable, and I just kind of got this idea about, serving our country. The other thing I didn't really want to do was go from college directly to, 2 vacation weeks a year. I wanted to see the world. I have a travel bug inside of me, so I like to travel a lot. And so I thought, let's go to the Navy and see the world. And so it wasn't until second semester senior year that I really thought about it. And through a course of action, I took the test a second time, didn't do well the first time, took the test a second time. And when I finished that, they said, do you want to take the aviation test? And I was like, I don't even know what that is, but I'll take it. And I did well enough that they were at least willing to send me off to Pensacola. And after I took the test, I said, what is actually entailed in aviation? And they said, well, you have to run a mile a day, mile and a half a day, and swim a mile. And I was like, I'm a pretty good swimmer. Let me try it for a couple of weeks. And I did. And after that, I was like, nah, let me go the other route. That seemed way too hard. And so it was a few months later, I was on a senior trip and on the beach in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, walking down the beach by myself one morning, and a formation of military helicopters flew overhead. And come from a spiritual background, I was like, really, God? So I called my recruiters and I said, hey, like, what are the chances of switching my package? They said, we'll call you back in 20 minutes. I called back in 20 minutes and they said, your package has been switched. Your medical physical is this date. Your arrival date in Pensacola is this date. And I'm like, I haven't talked to my parents. What are you talking about? I just said, what are the chances? And so there was a little bit of like magic. Like it just took over once I asked that question. And then I ended up going through it and struggled, but finally got my commission and went on to flight school.
I want to go back to something you said about in response to my question about who were folks who you may have expected to be allies. For my listeners who aren't watching this, I just used air quotes around the term allies. And you previously said women. I want to touch on that because it reminds me of something I heard a little while ago. I was listening to the news or something, and I heard a woman who I respect say the world would be so different if women were just running everything. But I think we would both agree, right, that we should have a world where women and people of color and everybody can, reach and do their full potential without a lot of artificial barriers, as has been the case historically. How do you think that we can, I'm just kind of thinking out loud, how can we have a more nuanced conversation about the need for diversity and representation without like ascribing all of these things to what that means? And I'm putting this to you because certainly I think much is often made of your achievement as the first Black woman Navy helicopter pilot. What are your thoughts on that?
That's a great question. Because Tanya, the thing that we have to start to look at is we need everyone at the table to make sure that we have the right products out there, that they speak to everyone. And if we have only one-sided view, because I've seen things happen when there's only one-sided view, where there's not gates and, where there's not questioning of, is this the right thing to do? And is this the right thing for a company to do? And so there isn't any reason why any company shouldn't want more voices at the table. There are some things that we have to do in order to get our women, and this includes me when I was an executive, get our women prepared for those conversations. Generally, we're more emotional when and this is not everyone, that was a generalization. I can speak for myself. I can come off very emotionally based when I'm very passionate about something. And some of the women that were on my teams were very much that way. And learning how to speak and learning how to be at the table and really realizing that our voice actually matters. And that's all colors, races, all diversity of all kind, because we'll get a better product and it will speak to the people that we want to buy our products, our services, whatever. So the more we are really taking into account different voices and recognizing that everyone is needed, and that it may just be a training thing, an opportunity to educate how to be in the room, how to have a seat at the table, how to use our voice in a way that is more inclusive for everyone, that opens doors in so many ways.
I want to talk a little bit about frustration. When you're trying to accomplish something, in your case, you were in the process, and you ultimately did, but you were, as you were trying to accomplish the goal of becoming a Navy pilot, can you think about a time where you just got really, really frustrated and you had to employ certain tools to kind of get yourself back on track. I mean, I think what I'm getting at is that everybody, right, whether or not the battle is with somebody else, whether or not the battle is with the voices in your head telling you that you're not going to make it, whether or not, you've tried to accomplish something and you haven't quite made it and you've got to go back and try again. What are your tools? If you've got a story to share, that would be great. But if you can even also talk generally about the tools you use to remotivate yourself when you feel like you're coming up short, or where maybe at some point in your process, Kamin, you did come up short.
I'll give you a couple of examples. So one is when I was in the military, and I mentioned about running. I wasn't a runner. There was this 3-mile run. You had to run 1.5 miles with a rifle and then 1.5 miles without it. And I came up short a lot for several reasons. And so I think it was the 6th time I ran that race, I remember being in the chow hall and the Master Chief said something. He called me over. And when they call you, it's not pleasant, and I was just devastated that day. And I had run with a different battalion. And he said to me, the only reason, one of the gunnery sergeants said, they should just kick you out. He just really deep voice, just kick you out, Belle, which is my maiden name. And I was just like, whatever, like in my head, whatever. And then the Master Chief said, Master Gunnery Sergeant said, they won't kick her out because she's black and she's a female. And in that moment,
this is all right in front of you. They're just no inside voice, just right in front of you.
And it just sounded like that. She's black and she's a female. And I was like, oh, you did not just say that out loud. Like, I know that's your inside voice, but that was out. I heard that. And what I did there, which was very different for me at that point, because I was exhausted, because I knew what was true, they just shouldn't have said it. And I I did speak up for myself, and I went to my lieutenant at that time, and I just said, I get that it might be the reality. I just don't think it should have been said. Now, I hadn't spoken up. From that point on, it was almost like it was hands off, right? And I thought they were going to send me home, and I was happy. I really wanted them to send me home. Inside of me, however, I had made a commitment. I had made a commitment to myself. The only commitment I had ever made up until 22 was don't quit. Couldn't quit. And I knew that that's all they wanted me to do, was to quit. And from that point on, that resolve not to quit was the guiding light in everything that I did. And so being able to speak up for ourselves, being able to just voice, I wasn't in a threatening way. I just spoke calmly about it. And I finally did pass the run, did get my commission. And then when I got my commission, I made another decision, which is to be number 1 in the squadron when I finished. That was the second commitment that served me well in my career, because I was far and away above everyone else when I got my wings. And so the ability for all of us to realize that we can choose not to quit on ourselves. We can choose to commit. We can have a vision for our lives. And I work with my clients all the time on this. What is your vision that you want to accomplish? Whether it's a short-term goal, a sprint, a long-term goal. The strategy to get there can change. The vision doesn't change. And I live by it now, especially because I teach it a lot, is a testing mentality. So you can have this vision for your life. But if the strategy needs to change, most people give up when the strategy fails, right? And they think that the vision, they shouldn't become a doctor, they shouldn't do this, they shouldn't, whatever. And the truth is, there's no way, going back to obstacles and conflict, there's no way actually to achieve the goal on the first try without some conflict And that conflict is just, oh, I need to tweak the strategy. That's it. And if we have this testing mentality to life, like, oh, I want to do X. Okay, how I'm getting there? Oh, can't do it that way. Interesting. And if we come at it from a science perspective, it just allows everything to go much smoother and in our lives, because then we don't take it personally that I failed. No, the strategy failed. The strategy didn't even fail. The strategy just needs to be tweaked in some way. Does that make sense?
It makes perfect sense. And I think another point you make, which really bears emphasizing, is the point about having a vision for your life, right? Because one of the things that strikes me, and it's in fact part of the reason I wanted to do this series, The Art of Our Wars, is because I often think that we are so busy. People can get so caught up in the noise and the fight and the clap back, and the making sure that my hashtag goes viral bigger than your hashtag did. We can sometimes lose sight of what the end game is, like the fight becomes so all consuming that we forget what the win is, right? Like we can forget how to define the win or to define that vision. You're a coach, how do you advise your clients when you are trying to get them to stay focused on the vision, on the end game? What's your best advice for doing that? Because there's a lot of noise out there, not just generally, but in people's lives.
A lot of the things that I work with my clients on is creating the stair step to their vision. Many times people will pick a vision that's either, too big, way out there, and they fall into that crack in our psyche that where all the limiting beliefs show up. Right? I'm not good enough. I'm not enough. I can't do this. They hear the voices of sometimes their, family of origin or teachers or whatever. And so if we make the goals to that vision in something that they can really stair step into, and they need to keep that vision in front of them on a daily basis. So there's the bigger vision. I want to become X. I want to become a doctor, a pilot, whatever. I want to grow a prosperous business in some way. That there's a number that they have in mind or an idea. Well, how you get there, well, let's do some doable steps. Let's not go too big. And it keeps us on the path, because when we're focused on the path, then we stop looking to the left or the right. Then we stop comparing ourselves, which is many times, and I've been guilty of it, of, knocking myself off because I'm comparing myself to somebody I put on a pedestal somewhere. And the ability for us to keep, our head down on our goal, keep focused, create milestones, create and celebrate our wins along the way. One of the things I do with one of my groups both of my groups is I have them tell me at the very beginning what went well and why this week. The more we can really celebrate and then get back in our game and stay focused and on that path, the better.
I think about the history, Kamin, that you've made. I know what it means to me, right? I mean, as a Black woman, I grew up, and, Black women have always been doing all kinds of things everywhere throughout time. But certainly there were presumptions, there were kind of presumptions about what we were going to do, where we should be, where we should belong. I think those presumptions are weaker now, but they still have to be challenged. And what your history means to me is that here's somebody else who said, you're not going to put me in a box. I can do whatever I want, wherever I want. I'm going to make my path wherever I choose it. What does your history, and maybe this is, I'll tell people in a little bit how we met, but you may be too modest to answer this question, but give it a go. What does the history that you made mean to you? Like when you think about what you've accomplished, what do you think about it? And if you say, well, I don't, go through my life thinking about it, I'm reminding you of it right now. So tell me, what does it mean to you, what you did?
This is definitely a difficult one for me.
I knew you were going to say that. I knew you were going to say that. I knew it.
Because when I came out of the military and I went into business for myself, I failed. I went into corporate and succeeded over time. And now as a coach, I put kind of my military career in a box. It was like, yeah, that was something I did. Great. It's not who I am. So I just kept moving on. And so when you ask that question about what does it mean to me, it's interesting. I recently met a man who was in the Army, and he said to me, he had retired after decades, and he said, "Oh, I heard about you." And I'm like, "What do you mean you heard about me?" And he said, "Well, I heard that, you did really well as a pilot and even getting your commission." And that's really that's what I wanted my legacy to be. Is when I graduated number one or went into my squadrons and pretty much every time was one or two at the top, I wanted them to always know what Black women could do. I never wanted them to create a stereotype that said we're just getting by, because I had that with, getting my commission. But from a pilot standpoint, I wanted to like knock it out of the park. So every female behind me, they had to live up to, well, this is what they can do, right? Because there's a they, air quote, they can do. And so for me, that legacy of knowing that other people knew about me and that I had to really, I was well ahead of my male counterparts when I got my commission, my wings specifically, and then had a really amazing career. That's what I wanted people to always remember. And so, because I wanted every other female behind, Black female, white female, anybody behind me to be like, oh, I can do that. I have a chance at being number one. And I have since met some and they were also in their squadron. And so for me, it's making sure that the perception of who we are and what we can do was true to that. There isn't anything we can't do.
Beautifully said. We met in the context of honoring a great legacy. It was on the USS Iowa as part of our Black History Month celebration, honoring Vice Admiral Gravely, who, as many of you know or have heard me say many times, was the first African American to command a Navy battleship. He served on the USS Iowa as communications officer. If you're in LA, you should go to the Iowa. But this is how Kamin and I first met each other. And in that program, you were talking to young people and giving great advice to young people. If you would, Kamin, I think that we're in a moment now where it's not just young people who are looking for good golden nuggets. I mean, there's a lot of turmoil. There is a lot of despair. There are a lot of grown folks, right, who I think are feeling unmoored and adrift. There's a sense that the system only works for certain people, and that if you're not one of those few people, all is lost. What do you say? What's your advice for folks who are feeling left out, left behind, like not in the mix? All of these, they turn on the news and the good news is happening to people other than them, and they've got to deal with all of the muck that people have to deal with. What's your advice to people who need to find some spark to try to get motivated to move forward?
So this is a beautiful question, because I want to warn the listeners, I'm all optimism. So if I get a glass with quarter inch in it full, I'm all full. I'm an all full kind of gal. And so there's a couple of things that people can do. I say this from the fullness of my heart and the knowing that I have that this is the most creative time in history. And that turn off the news and go create your news. Go create the life that you want. What could you do? Every one of us has skills and abilities and superpowers that we can use that will begin to help people to see them differently. They have to, one of the things that I work with people all the time on is how do they see themselves? right? What do they believe about themselves? If I could be a pilot, if I could be an executive, if I could be a prosperous coach, then they can. They can do anything. Everybody can. And so going back to what you said about a vision, you have to have a vision. Without a vision, people perish. So you have to have a vision for your life. And so today, what is it that you wanted to do between the ages of 7 and 14? Did you want to be a pilot, an artist, a singer, a doctor? And so there are different ways that can manifest no matter how old you are. And the ability for us to take, again, that first step. And I say this, and it's interesting when we were on the Iowa, someone asked about, how to thrive and how to succeed. And I said, I kept my head down. I mean that from the literal sense of when I was in the Navy, the only way I could get through a run was keeping my head down. If I looked up, I'd see how far I went. And if it wasn't at the end, towards the end, I'd even slow up. So the ability for us to keep our heads focused on what's that next step, take it, test it out, see what it is. If you have an amazing voice, try out for something, sing your heart out. So the ability, each of us has the ability to innovate on our own life. And so I would encourage all people to write down their goals. What would you like to accomplish in the next 3 to 6 months? What would you like to accomplish this year? What would you like to accomplish in the next 3 years? I usually don't go further than that because life happens and they change. But you can have a vision for your life. There are many exercises that are on, what would you like them to say at your funeral? What would your eulogy say? And start to live from that. So if you could take those and live from that and start to see, well, who would I need to be if I were going to be an executive at my company and I'm now, an entry-level person? Well, who would I need to be? A lot of times I'm really working with my clients on wear that persona like an old, warm, favorite coat. Like walk in it. When you're doing the dishes or getting dressed in the morning, who would you be at that next level? Listen from that step, that next step. Take action on those things so that you can begin to move forward. One of the things I love to say that was one my parents said all the time to all of us as kids, there are 4 of us, be excellent anyway. No matter what happens in your life, it's not about taking the high road. It's like, be excellent. Be excellent so that they can't deny that. One of the greatest books to read is from Cal Newport on so good they can't ignore you. Be so good that whatever it is that you want to do, they can't ignore you. Help people, serve, and be that persona of who accomplishes that.
Be excellent anyway. I love that. So since we know each other a little bit before, I can tell people that you and I have something in common. And we have a big love and a big passion in common. And that is Disneyland.
Yes.
Just to switch it up for a minute, Disneyland. So before you go, Disneyland is actually, Kamin, one of my favorite places anywhere ever. I'm not going to spend time talking about why I love it so much. I want to hear about why you love it so much. And then one day we're going to go.
Oh, Disneyland is definitely one of my favorite places on this planet, if not the favorite. I keep behind me this picture of Cinderella's castle. I will keep it up no matter who I'm talking with, because for me, it is about life is magical. Like we get to create magic in our own life. And I just went there a couple of weeks ago, took my husband for his birthday. It was he's older. So I'm like, we're going, you want to go to Disneyland? And I am like,
was he like, yeah? Or was
yes,
he like,
no, he
are we just going to Disneyland for you, honey?
I won't be, I can't take him on the teacups anymore. Because I made him put his head back one time, and that was a bad, because for me, like all things spinning is wonderful. And so the ability for us to realize that there is a happy place on earth, that we get to create our happy place. And that opportunity for us to create the magic in our own lives, to realize that, if I don't like what is going on in my life right now, I get to look at it differently, because I am always looking for, and I stopped my clients when we went into COVID, like here is what we're going to deal with. How is this a blessing in your life? Whatever the challenge is, how did we unconsciously create it? Not the challenge, the horrific things of losing people, but how did we do that? And that was because people were like, I don't want to go to work. I don't want to go to work. How do we collectively not go to work? And then what are the things that we want? Like, what are we hearing? What are we awakening to in our life? And then how to take action. And so magic and Disneyland reminds me of that all the time, that, wait, I don't like this circumstance. Let me change it. We can do that from the inside out. Wealth, abundance, joy, happiness, freedom is first an inside game, then an outside game.
I love that. And I love how you made Disneyland just even more important to me than it already is. As a symbol, as a symbol of great magic. Kamin Samuels, you are a coach, you are an author, you are a history maker. You are also a fan of Disneyland and just an extraordinary person. I really do hope you come back. It's been an honor meeting you. I'm getting to know you a little bit. And I do hope that we see each other again here on my show, if not at the Magic Kingdom.
I'd love to come back. Thank you so much. And let's plan Disneyland, because I can go any day of the week.
I love that. Thank you, Kamin.
Thank you.